And what China and India need most are consumers.
Mm-hmm.
They need people to buy their products. I mean, we want cheap products, sure. And a lot of it comes from China and a lot of it comes from India because they're not paying their people very much to create these products for us. But we have the power of consumerism to dictate to a certain degree what they do. And this, I think this is what they fear the most, is the power of consumerism. If we're buying their products, to a certain extent, we can dictate how those products are manufactured.
Mm.
And if they're turning a blind eye to everything environmental in terms of their energy consumption, their lakes and rivers, in order to create those cheap products for us, then we're to blame.
Hey everyone, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. I'm Matthew Kristoff. On this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Most of the things we're talking about on here, it's just, a couple of people chatting, talking about the things they're passionate about. So this podcast is just a forum for people to express ideas and exchange ideas and try to understand what's going on with land management and sustainability in our world. So the views expressed on here don't necessarily represent the views of the sponsors. Today's episode was awesome. I really enjoyed talking to him. Tony Kryzanowski. He is a journalist for the last 31 years. He's been a journalist for forestry and renewable energy news. And really awesome guy. He has a website called forestsfields.com. And on there you can find all of the stuff that he's been writing about over the years. And really, really great guy. Lots of interesting insight into a broad range of topics. And I wanted to bring him on to talk about a few different things. One being forestry in general and, the sustainability of forestry and where we're headed and where he sees it. We got a little bit into the softwood lumber agreement and some of that stuff. But a giant chunk of this conversation, we ended up talking about a lot about renewable energy and tree farming and that kind of stuff, and how tree farming can be a actual climate change solution as well as benefit the economy and small businesses small towns and that kind of stuff. And then talking about bioenergy and renewable energy and some innovative solutions into solving some of the problems we have around climate change and all that kind of stuff. So it was a great conversation. We really talked a lot all over the place. But you guys are going to like it. I promise you. He's a great mind. Had a lot of cool things to say for sure. And definitely jumped around the spectrum of ideas. So sponsors for this episode. West Fraser is the number one sponsor for Your Forest in 2020. Without them, it wouldn't be possible to do the things that I'm doing, to speak to the people I'm speaking to. So thank you so much to West Fraser. I could not thank you enough. Also, another sponsor is Greenlink Forestry. Same deal. Been with me since the beginning, and without them, I couldn't do things the way I do it. So thank you. And third is Damaged Timber. Damaged Timber is a company right here out of Edmonton, Alberta. And his main feature product now is actually he's creating butcher boards and cutting boards out of damaged timber, out of wildfire burnt wood. He's going into the bush where wildfire happened, cutting down a tree and turning that into a product you can put in your home. It is so awesome. Definitely check them out. 10% of everything they sell goes towards a scholarship for environmental sciences students. And put in Your Forest 10 at checkout and get 10% off. So why not check them out, right? There you go. Let's do this. Let's talk to Tony about his, the reason I wanted to talk to him was to try and get an outside perspective on forestry, on renewables, on just kind of sustainability in Canada and where we're headed, and maybe find some interesting solutions. So, it was a great conversation. Tony's awesome. You guys are going to love it. Without any further messing around, here we go. the general main thing I start with is asking people like why you got into forestry journalism. I don't know if you call it forestry journalism, but that sector of journalism, and what keeps you there, because you've been an editor for these 3 different magazines: Logging and Sawmilling magazine, the Energy magazine, and there was a third one with a much longer name.
Well, there's Independent Sawmill and Woodlot Management magazine, that's out of Maine. Then I also do some writing for a German publication called Forest and Technik as well. So I've been expanding my base probably over the last couple of years a bit more beyond Canada. And it's been very positive. Yeah. Then, of course, I've also expanded on the internet with my website called forestsandfields.com. Actually, it's forestsfields.com. The reason I did that is because I've been writing about the forestry sector, renewable energy and renewable sciences generally for over 30 years. There's articles I've written 10 years ago, 15 years ago that are still applicable today. But because the original article only appeared in print, it's living in some archive somewhere, in some magazine archive somewhere. And so I actually own the rights to all these articles. And I thought that what I would do in order to give new life to these articles and make sure that these concepts and some of the better ideas and so forth were still available to anyone who wanted to read about it, and people in forestry, obviously, and involved in renewable resources of any kind, that they would have access kind of on a permanent basis to that information, that if they ever, for example, did a web search on Google or wherever, that potentially, this article would pop up and it would provide them with some information of value to them in what they're doing today. And of course, it has a sort of a long-term longevity issue as well, and the fact that it'll kind of always be there as long as I guess I keep paying for the website.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's what I've been interested in lately, and I've also kind of gotten a bit out of my lane in the writing area as well. I've just finished my first novel.
Oh, nice!
I just finished writing it. Actually, the version I'd like to have the Canadian Writers Union review. Just finished it last week, in fact. So it's 350 pages long. I challenged myself to write a page a day, and I did.
Nice.
And so I'm just waiting on my membership application and go through that process. So hopefully in a year or so, I'll also be a sort of published novelist, and along with all those other things as well. So.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty cool though. You have the like a wide range of perspectives when it comes to all these journals that you've been a part of and that kind of stuff. So it's cool. But so what do you think it was that drove you into doing this kind of work, and what, more importantly, what keeps you there? Like what motivates you to continue to do this kind of work?
Well, I actually grew up on a subsistence farm, and I spent a lot of time outside. I was somewhat of an only child because my brothers and sisters were considerably older than me, so being on a subsistence farm, we had no running water, no telephone, no power. So my days as a youth were spent running around the forest. And that really has stuck with me my entire life. I've always enjoyed the forest environment. And so I worked in the newspaper industry for about 15 years, and I just felt trapped, locked in an office type environment. So I really wanted to put myself into a situation where I could be outdoors a bit more, but at the same time using my journalism degree to my advantage economically. So that's what caused me to sort of direct myself toward the forestry, even though I'm not a registered professional forester. And I wouldn't ever claim to be. But I guess I'm a bit of a sponge in the fact that because I have an interest in sort of what I would call the biological sciences, generally natural sciences, anyone who wants to talk about it or share information with me, I'm wired to be interested in what they're having to say. And so that's what got me interested in the forestry area.
Right.
And believe it or not, there's just not a lot of writers out there interested in writing about forestry. So
it's not a super sexy topic for some reason, right? Like it's just, yeah.
No. And so when I made initial inquiries with the forestry magazines, they were happy to bring me on, especially if I was willing to stand out in 40 below zero in January, talking to a logger in northern Saskatchewan, which I've done.
Yeah.
So, there's just not a lot of people willing to do that. But I'm not saying that I enjoy doing that, and
minus 40 is a lot for anybody.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 60 years old now, so I try to do most of my features between, 1st of March and end of October. So, most of the stuff I do in the wintertime now, I try to do indoors if I can. I don't mind making short trips and so forth. But just the willingness to be out there and be where the actual work is done, there was an opportunity there, and I just took advantage of it.
Yeah, no, your writing is, and like I've only known about you for a couple months now, but I've been impressed with like the articles and the breadth of articles that you have out there, and really spanning some good topics and that kind of stuff. And so you've been doing this for how long now? Have you been in this sector?
Well, my actual first article for a forestry magazine was in 1989.
Okay.
So 31 years is how long I've been doing it. So I would say my interest is more than forestry. It's more land management, forest management, management of natural resources in a sustainable way. So I'm more than just interested in logging or in sawmilling. I'm interested in the sort of sustainable use of all resources on the land.
Same.
Is how I would explain it. And again, it would also explain my interest in renewable energy, renewable resources, in using sort of what nature provides us in a sustainable way to sustain ourselves as a species.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's my interest as well, right? That whole concept of sustainability when it comes to land management and what we should be doing, what we can do, where we should be going. So I wanted to ask you, somebody who I feel like has an outside perspective of, the forest industry and how renewable energy is moving forward and that kind of stuff. How what does sustainable forestry look like to you? Do you think that we've achieved that goal, or do you think that there's room to grow?
I think we're doing a pretty good job in Canada. When you look at the number of certified forests here in Canada, for example, this is according to the Forest Products Association of Canada and statistics taken in 2018. Canada has 164 million hectares of certified forests of all certifying organizations, those majority being the FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, Sustainable Forestry Initiative, SFI, and the Canadian Standards Association. These are statistics taken from 2018. I mean, the next closest one, and I was quite surprised that this one, was Russia, but it's a distant second at 57 million hectares. United States, 39 million hectares, Sweden at 21 million, Finland at 18 million hectares. And this is one that's really sad, is Brazil, with the massive Amazon rainforest. They only have 8 million certified hectares.
Yeah.
As compared to 164 million in Canada. So, you talk in terms of sustainability. I think we're doing a pretty good job, and I think the certification organizations have helped in that regard. So I think we're doing a good job. And when I talk about sustainability, it's the old adage of planting more trees than you're harvesting. But the one area I think that we still need to work at is the area of biodiversity within sustainability. It's not enough in my mind to just plant a tree for every tree you harvest. The environment in which you're harvesting the tree is a biodiverse environment with a lot of other resources within that environment. And I think there's going to be problems if we simply turn natural forests into tree farms, and we don't take into consideration, the understory that typically grows in the natural forest, the wildlife that typically exists within that forest. I'll give you an example, and I stand to be corrected on this, but I think I'm quite right on this. In Alberta, for example, I'll take my home province for an example, and I'm not sure what the regulations are in the rest of Canada, but in Alberta, we allow the harvesting of a coniferous forest, and and rather than allowing that forest to regenerate itself as it naturally would in a mixed wood environment, in other words, allowing the poplar and the aspen to grow back first, and then over time letting the spruce take over, we're allowing the harvesting of the conifers and then the immediate replanting of the conifers, which is breaking the natural cycle of that biodiversity in the mixed wood forest. And so consequently, there's going to be a price to pay if we don't manage our mixed forests for biodiversity in a better way than we're doing. We're going to lose species. We're going to lose not just animal species. We're going to lose plant species too. And so, that's one area that I think we certainly need to improve on. We can't underestimate the value of the boreal fire origin forest as an ecosystem in the world. I mean, next to the rainforest, and maybe as important as the rainforest, it's a tremendously important forest in the world. And we have to be very, very careful in how we manage all the resources within that land base.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think we've definitely nailed down the sustainable yield portion of it, right? Like, we're not running out of trees anytime soon, and that portion I think is something that we've got figured out. Like, there's Vic Leifers, he's a professor at the U of A. He's been quoted a bunch of times, including on this podcast, saying like, maybe we've gotten too good at growing back trees, right? Because exactly the thing you were talking about, and yeah, there's lots of arguments, there's lots of discussion and research going into exactly what you just said, the successional regeneration and that kind of stuff, and especially the one thing that interests me too a lot is like you said, the biodiversity, and not just the biodiversity, but the multiple use values portion of that, and how that is incorporated into sustainable forest management, and whether or not it's something that we're actually doing, or if it's just a box we're checking off, right? And I don't know the answer. Like, I know that all the professionals that I know are extremely adamant about, you know what I mean? They're the ones that they want this to happen, and they want to manage the forest properly, and they're the ones that are passionate about it, and they're doing what they think is right, and I totally support them. But you do hear a lot of stuff in, like, you know what I mean, in the public sphere of, you know what I mean, people will have a hard time with forestry. They don't really understand what's going on, and I just wonder what your perspective was on that. Like, if you thought that it's clearly you said it sounds like we have more to do, and do you think that we're heading that direction though? Do you think we're going there?
No, unfortunately, I don't.
No, okay,
no. There are a couple other things we can do. I have a bit of an issue with how we measure retention. As you know, legally there's a certain amount of retention required, and
so trees left in
buffers,
the couple,
right, and also buffers, creeks, draws, and so forth. Some of the way we measure retention, I've been to some cut blocks, and one tree left standing in the cut block is considered retention. All you need is one windstorm, and there goes your retention. Yeah. So I think we need to do a better job of maintaining actual blocks in retention that can sustain a different environment, such as wind throw, and we have to be aware that if we don't create proper retention blocks, they're just going to blow down, because the whole block is based upon all the trees, or the entire block being treed. So that's the way those trees have grown. So if you suddenly remove 85%, 90%, whatever, of the trees, you've got an issue with your retention block. So you have to make sure that retention block is resilient enough to whatever nature's going to throw at it, so that it stays as a retention block.
And that's important for, like you said, the biodiversity reasons and the buffer zones on water course and that kind of stuff.
And the other thing we can do, and I know there's some companies that have tried this, whether they've continued doing it or not, is getting away from the square blocks and getting more into mosaic patterns. I know that the technology exists. What I mean by mosaic patterns is looking at forest fire patterns and mimicking them in cut blocks. I know that there are programs that exist, and I don't know if there are any forest companies that are actually practicing this.
For sure there is,
but developing mosaic cut blocks that mimic forest fires versus the square block. You know, of course, everybody loves the square block because everybody knows where the edge is, and you don't pay any fines. But at the same time, it's not very good for biodiversity and forest retention and regeneration, I guess, is what I would say in that case. So,
well, and that's kind of a remnant of an old way of doing things. Like, they haven't done the square block, I don't think, they haven't planned any new square blocks, I think, since the 90s or something like that. Like, there was something they did in the 80s. They were doing these checkerboard pattern, thinking it was good for moose habitat. And that was the intent, was to be good for biodiversity. And they ended up going away from that. And so any new harvesting you see of those is just removing what was in between, right? Like, they're not, I don't think they can legally plan any more square blocks like that. Like, they're definitely mosaic. They follow a stand type, and they follow that kind of stuff. And
well, that's excellent that they're doing that. The other thing that they could do a little better is the amount of retention. I think it's kind of low. I can't quote a percentage. I think it's 5%. I could be wrong in that.
I forget too. I don't remember.
But whatever the retention amount is, it could stand to be a little higher, a couple percentages higher, because that really does help, in terms of maintaining your biodiversity and animal movement. And so on. And, even in environmentally sensitive areas, everyone wants to rope everything off. They want to create environments to save the caribou, to save whatever, and in the fire origin forest, you're not doing nature any favors by doing that, because it's just all going to burn, or it's all going to fall to insects. So you'd be much better off, picking your spots on a seasonality basis and actually allow some select logging into those areas. I know in Northern Ontario, for example, there's big issues with caribou. In Alberta, there's issues with caribou, and even BC, there's issues with caribou. So I think there has to be some really sound thinking and reflection on how to manage both, or all the resources in that instance.
Yeah, I think that's the important part, right? And that's part of the forest management plan that they do as landscape managers, right? Is they try to include all of those aspects and stuff. But so from your perspective, you think there's still room to grow there. There's still, and I know that the forest industry is working on that, right? I think they're constant, from my perspective at least, and I would like to know what you think. I feel like they're always trying to challenge those ideas and always trying to move forward. Is that true from your perspective, do you think?
Well, I think we're into fractions of percentages of benefits when we're talking about different management styles in the natural forest. And what I mean by that is we're pretty good at it. Yeah. And so anything we do is the benefit is going to be, small percentages.
Okay.
Because, like I say, we're very good at managing the natural forest, and I think we should, to a great extent, just continue doing what we're doing. Mm-hmm. The area where I see real opportunities in tree farming on private land. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because this is a way of enhancing the fiber basket. There's so many benefits to it. There's way of enhancing the fiber basket. You create natural carbon sinks, so there's an environmental dividend for everybody, for the government, for forest companies, for the landowners. Mm-hmm. And there's new models, proven models that have been developed right here in Alberta by the Canadian Wood Fiber Centre of a mixed wood tree farming model, where they've actually proven through tree farms that they've had here in Ellerslie in Edmonton, where you plant your initial fast-growing aspen or a poplar clone, and you're talking about full growth probably within 15 to 20 years. as opposed to, I don't know, it's 60, 70 years in
Yeah.
natural forest. And then after about 5 years or so, once your hardwood forest is established, you go into that same cut or the same tree farm and you plant white pine or white spruce in the understory. So you're literally creating a mixed wood forest on private land in a commercial setting. So this is an opportunity, again, I'm a big promoter on it. I'm a big promoter of it on my website of commercial tree farming in Canada, of creating an environment in terms of carbon credit trading and making it beneficial for private landowners to dedicate a portion of their farmland to actual tree farming. And by claiming carbon credits within the first or second year of establishing that tree farm, they're actually recouping the cost of establishing that tree farm right up front. So, they're basically, if they're allowed to claim carbon credits, then they basically get a check every year. After 5 years, you have understory, the crown closure, I should say. And so there's no more vegetation management required. And within, like I say, 15 to 20 years on the hardwood crop, you can harvest it.
Yeah.
And then you can just simply leave it and allow your evergreen, your coniferous crop to grow after that. And if you want, you can just start the whole process again. So this is technology that's ready to go. It's commercial. It's developed right here in Alberta. But I was a bit shocked, when I was investigating this to find out that in Alberta we actually have a carbon tax on the heavy emitters. The Emissions Reduction Alberta, I believe, ERA, is the organization that administers, I believe, the collection of those fees from the large emitters. And I think it's $15 a ton. I could be wrong in that. Maybe it's gone up. And then they distribute that money to carbon sink type products or projects, renewable energy type projects that look to lower greenhouse gas emissions and so on. Now, I was really shocked to find out that there's no protocol for tree farming.
Yeah.
When you consider that, according to the Canadian Wood Fiber Center, half of a tree is carbon.
Yeah.
All the money seems to be going to agriculture. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical there. It almost looks like a subsidy program. It almost looks like, to me, paying farmers to do what they wouldn't do anyway.
Yeah.
And so,
how much carbon is being sunk by farming? They've got
all sorts of formulas. If you go on the website, the Emissions Reduction Alberta website, and if you go on their website, I mean, they've had the protocols. It's all public.
Yeah.
But there's all sorts of formulas about, if you do no-till, and then you'll save this much, in terms of carbon emissions and all this sort of stuff. Boy, I'll tell you, I just shake my head and wondering how come the forest industry hasn't done its work working with the Canadian Wood Fiber Center and all this technology that's been developed in Alberta and actually put the numbers together on how much carbon is sequestered on a hectare of a tree farm and put a protocol together so that there's encouragement of landowners to get into tree farming.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing.
It's a head scratcher. The Alberta Forest Products Association, they seem to know nothing about this. There are a few people in government who unfortunately have been laid off now who had some interest in doing that. We have a Woodlot Association of Alberta, and we also have the Agroforestry Woodlot Extension Society. I believe that's what they're called. These are like private or landowner groups, but they're just not well enough organized to really be advocates for that sort of thing. And we could have a hugely developed tree farming industry, not just in Alberta, but across Canada, if we just put some effort into it.
So what do you think? I want to back up just a second and explain in basic terms the idea of tree farming and this is all private lands, just so people know this isn't, we're not going to be planting trees as a tree farm on public land. This is all private land stuff. So what would be the benefit to doing that on private land versus like whatever else it might be used for, agriculture or ranch land or something like that? And like, what are all the benefits to this? Because I think a lot of people, they might think like, okay, you're farming trees and then you're going to cut them down and you're going to burn them for fuel or you're going to whatever, right? So let's just explain it kind of step by step, all the benefits you're getting from tree farming and why it is a worthwhile cause.
Well, I've heard it described as an RRS tree. and the reason is that, for example, if you were a landowner and you dedicated 50 hectares, I'm just picking a number, to a commercial tree farm, and you followed the protocols established by the Canadian Wood Fiber Center, the initial benefit would be carbon credit income for the farmer. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, this doesn't exist yet, and it needs to exist. Because in order to encourage private landowners to establish tree farms, they have to have some sort of an income to offset the cost of establishing that tree farm. So there's that benefit. I'm hopeful that within the next 5 years or so that we will have a protocol. In fact, I'm hoping that we have a national protocol to pay landowners to plant trees.
There's a huge public benefit to keeping those trees there, or planting more,
Of course. And then, of course, the environmental benefit for the province, for the country, is half of a tree is carbon. So if you want to meet your international commitments to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, you better start planting trees, because that's the most natural, easiest way of doing it, because half a tree is carbon. So for every tree you plant, you're automatically sequestering trees. Now, the technology what's beneficial to the industry, the forest industry, for example, the technology that's been developed by the Canadian Wood Fiber are using fast-growing species. These aren't Franken trees. These aren't genetically modified trees. These are actually clones.
People hate the idea of the GMO thing, right? They start worrying about that. These
are clones developed largely through the going back to the 1930s. The federal government established a program of developing fast-growing poplar as windbreaks because of the dirty 30s problem of losing soil in the wind. So they developed fast-growing poplar species as wind breaks to stop soil erosion. So the Canadian Wood Fiber Center and a lot of the scientific community within the Canadian Forest Service sort of took that a step further and actually developed fast-growing poplar and aspen species that'll grow 8 times faster than they would normally grow in the forest. So the benefit to the forest industry there, say, for example, if you're a pulp producer, OSB producer, I'm just talking about hardwood at this point, you would have a fiber source in a fraction of the time as they are currently harvesting within the natural mixed wood forest. So that's the benefit to the forest industry. Now, if you look at it from the mixed wood model that I had mentioned earlier, the benefit to the softwood industry is that if you follow the mixed wood model, you're expanding your fiber resource outside of the natural forest, your fiber basket, to having softwood species that again grow, I think at least twice, if not faster, in a crop environment than they do in the natural forest. So you're growing spruce and white pine at a much faster rate in a controlled environment. Now, from a harvesting standpoint, there's benefits on farmland as well. First of all, infrastructure. You can easily access that tree farm. You don't have to worry about building bush roads. You don't have to worry about, steep slopes, anything of that nature that you're dealing with in the natural forest right now. On a tree farm, you're basically driving off the existing infrastructure, off a highway or off a road, and driving into the cut block. all the trees are the same size.
Yeah.
All the trees are the same height. And it's basically like gardening. I mean, you're snipping the trees in a straight line. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy logging. So there's benefits that way from a harvesting perspective.
What about like the climate change perspective, like the actual carbon emission, like carbon sequestration thing? How much research has been done into that, into like how much carbon is sequestered? And people will say like, oh, you're going to farm these trees and you're going to cut them down and then release the carbon. And so what is the argument there, and how does that tie into the offset?
Well, trees are carbon neutral, are stated as carbon neutral, and I totally agree with that.
I agree too, yeah.
Because if you're cutting a tree, and even if you're burning it, you're replacing existing carbon into the atmosphere that would have normally gone into the atmosphere if the tree had burned in a forest fire.
Right.
So trees are part of the natural carbon cycle on the earth. So if you're making wood pellets, for example, you're simply returning, for heat energy, you're simply returning the carbon into the air, which will then be absorbed by new trees that will sequester the carbon, and the cycle continues. So that's the argument there, and that's the benefit.
Yeah, and some people would say, well, why do we do it then if it's carbon neutral? But I guess the answer would be this is afforestation. You're adding more trees to the system, so in that sense, it actually becomes a carbon sink because now you've added, you know what I mean, a bigger portion of biomass that's accumulating carbon over time.
Well, it's a volume issue. Yeah. It's a volume issue because if you're looking at, they're sponges, is what they basically are.
For sure.
You're cleaning the air by creating these tree farms as sponges that are sequestering the additional CO2 in the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And so that's basically how it works.
Do you have a concern if somebody didn't have the values, the environmental values or the multiple use values as a manager, and say you had a government that was willing to sell you public land to turn into tree farms? Obviously that would be problematic, to say the least. At least in my opinion, it would be. How do we go against preventing, you know what I mean, people saying like exactly like what you said, like, oh, well, if that's the better way to do it for the economy, a better way to do it for the environment and carbon sequestration, maybe we should just start converting public land into private land that we can farm.
No, I have to say I'm totally against that.
Yeah.
I'm completely in favor of the Canadian model of forest management versus the American model, which is essentially companies buying huge land bases, yes, to establish forests, but there's no management for biodiversity within those forests of any kind. And the forest companies become land managers, and all they're really trying to do is build assets on their balance sheet.
Yeah.
Whereas in Canada, I totally agree with the Canadian model of keeping the natural forest in public hands. I'm talking strictly existing private land.
Yeah, I'm just kind of being devil's advocate here.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
No, I'm completely against any monetization of the public resource into a private asset.
Yeah,
I think that would be a monumental mistake.
Yeah, no, and I agree too. It's one of those things you got to think about with this kind of stuff because people start getting light bulbs going off, right?
Yeah,
but I
still think that that's why we have problems with our softwood lumber agreement negotiations. I think the Americans are just so mad at us that we won't sell them land to plant trees that it's payback.
Yeah.
And they constantly bring up the issue of the stumpage fees as a subsidy, and therefore justifying a tariff on Canadian softwood lumber. But of course, they never bring up the issue of the value of all those tree farms on their balance sheets. That never becomes part of the equation. Oh, they don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
They just want to pay back Canadians for not letting them do what they do in the United States.
Which is why they always lose in court.
Well, but that's what I fear is is the Americans are very, very tough negotiators, and they'll keep at an issue forever. Mm-hmm. They're waiting for that one win. Mm-hmm. Someday, they know that one day they're going to win something. Mm-hmm. And that's my fear, is that if we are constantly playing this game on the softwood lumber issue, we're going to win every time. We better beware the one time we lose.
Good point. That's a great point.
And so I'm against the softwood lumber agreement. I don't think there should be any softwood lumber agreement. The reason being is that the main reason behind the softwood lumber agreement was the dominance of the BC interior of the industry in Canada and the amount of softwood lumber that they were shipping to the United States. And it was a lot. I mean, the exchange really helped Canadian industry, to send materials to the United States because we were being paid in American dollars. So, I mean, only an idiot wouldn't gain 20% on their sales by being paid in American dollars. So you understand why Canadian companies want to ship as much softwood lumber to the United States. And just to throw some numbers out there, in terms of understanding the dominance of the BC interior of the softwood lumber trade to the United States. And these are taken from the Government of Canada, softwood lumber exported from Canada to the U.S. in January 2020. That means like this year. Mm-hmm. There was just over 1 billion board feet of softwood lumber exported to the United States from Canada. Of that, a third of it, now this is just for the month of January, I believe, about a third of it, 353 million board feet, was just the BC interior. So over a third of all the softwood lumber being shipped to the United States was coming from the BC interior. The next largest exporter was the province of Quebec, and they're at 195 million board feet. So we're talking about the whole province of Quebec, and they're only shipping 2/3 of what just the BC interior was shipping. Yeah. Alberta was at 162 million, and Ontario at 124 million. Now this is going to change. This is going to change drastically, and this is what a lot of people don't realize, is that because of the softwood lumber issue, the mountain pine beetle issue, the BC interior is losing a massive amount of its commercial forest. There's a company out of Boston, I believe they have a Canadian office now, called Forest Economic Advisors. They do projecting in terms of the fiber basket here in Canada. And what they're predicting is that there will only be about 55 sawmills left in the BC interior by 2028. And this is as compared to 95 in 2007. So there'll be just over half as many sawmills in the BC interior by 2028 as there were in 2007. So what does that mean? That means that that the BC interior will be supplying only about half, or maybe a little bit more than half, of what they have been supplying into the American market in terms of softwood lumber. So what does that mean in terms of the softwood lumber agreement? That means that completely destroys the American argument that Canadian softwood lumber is being dumped into the United States. The reason being is that we aren't going to be producing anywhere near the volume of softwood lumber as a percentage that we have been into the United States, because it just doesn't exist anymore. The mountain pine beetle has, because it's decimated the BC interior, it's going to significantly diminish the amount of softwood lumber that region, which dominates the Canadian softwood lumber industry. They're just not going to be shipping as much into the U.S.
Not to mention all the wildfires, massive wildfires that have
right. So if you're saying, if the Americans are saying, well, we're penalizing you because you're dumping softwood lumber into the United States, that argument doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. It may have existed during all the other softwood lumber agreements. And, if you wanted to look in terms of percentages, it's not going to exist anymore. Yeah. So that's why I say there's no need for a softwood lumber agreement, because we're not going to be dumping softwood lumber into the United States anymore. In fact, they're going to be crying for building materials because they're just not going to be getting it from Canada. Mm. They're going to, and it's already showing, they're going to be getting more wood from Europe, the Baltics in Europe. They're going to be getting more wood from Russia, and we'll do the best we can and how much we can send. But until that pine forest, or the forest, I hope it's not all going to be pine. We don't make the same mistake. Until that forest regenerates in the BC interior, we're just not going to be sending as much.
Yeah.
And so there should be no softwood lumber.
Not to mention climate change altering, the growing capacity of some places.
Yeah.
And all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. This should be, I've heard the lawyers who are involved in these negotiations speak at conferences, and it's just lawyer speak. And that's, unfortunately, we're getting caught up into negotiating in legalese, with the U.S., and it needs to be taken away from the lawyers, in my opinion. It has to be handled by the politicians. Mm-hmm. They have to be dealing with real numbers, real projections, and they're kind of like we did with the North American Free Trade Agreement. The politicians have to sit down, have a really solid discussion about this on the real numbers, and come to an understanding about what the reality is in Canada stripping softwood lumber to the U.S. in future. It's just not the same story as it was in the past, and we need to, our negotiators need to be able to play a little hardball with the Americans in the fact and saying that we should not be. There should be no tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber going to the U.S.
Yeah, that's a weird one for sure.
Yeah, and it's not the same old. Yeah, it's a different world now based on what's happening in the BC interior.
Yeah, no, definitely for sure.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to just the tree farms just a little bit on thinking about the use of tree farms and what that use would be good for, right? So because you're a big advocate for it and you have lots of articles about it, and is the intention for that wood to be used towards more of creating biofuels or creating pellets or something like the energy, or would it also be used for engineered wood? There's all kinds of really cool, new innovative products they can make out of just raw cellulose and lignin, and all kinds of interesting stuff. So what would be the way, how would you like to see it go?
I'd like it to be all encompassing. I don't see it as just, you can grow biomass strictly for fuel. Yeah. And you can grow biomass strictly for bioproducts. Mm-hmm. It's called concentrated biomass. That's the name of the tree farm pattern. Yeah. It's basically fast-growing willow that you can harvest in 3 years.
Oh, is that what they do?
It already exists.
Gotcha.
We haven't talked about willow. Basically, we've been talking about solid wood like poplar, aspen, and softwoods. Mm-hmm. But there is a pattern called concentrated biomass where you can grow willow in 3 years, and you can literally crop it every 3 years and use it as bioenergy. You can use it, and in all sorts of bioproducts. Heck, you can make cosmetics out of it. There's all sorts of things you can do.
There's lots of interesting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but that mostly, let's say, bioenergy is how you would use that pattern. Now you're asking me, well, how would you use the tree farm fiber? I would use it in everything. Okay. I would use it in OSB. I would use it in pulp. I would use it in solid wood products. I would use it in biomass or bioenergy. You have the option of using the residuals from the tree farm as your resource, or you can grow bioenergy crops for that purpose. My point in the tree farm is, if you're waiting to expand your industry by the natural forest and the way it's managed now, you're going to be waiting a long time, because we're at that point now, fractions of percentages, like I say. There's just so much more efficiency that you can create in the natural forest before it doesn't look like the natural forest anymore. It looks like a tree farm. Yeah. So, you're constantly going to have to balance that biodiversity with growing commercial trees in the natural forest, and you have to just accept it. Mm-hmm. Canada is always going to have a natural forest. The public will never support converting the natural forest into tree farms. Not. Yeah. Just accept it. So how do you build your fiber basket? There's only one way to grow the industry, and that's to build your fiber basket. Mm-hmm. And that's where my concept of tree farming comes in. Because, it seems like. If you're West Fraser, if you're Canfor, if you're Interfor, if you're Miller Western, if you're, whoever, Resolute, if you plant if you get into the tree farming, you can plant and add to your fiber basket, and then you can grow your business. In fact, you can, and Alpac has done this to some degree because they have been a leader in tree farming, actually, although they backed away from it. But if you drive around within 150 kilometer radius of the Alpac pulp mill in Athabasca or Boyle, you'll see tree farms all over the place that Alpac has planted with private landowners. Mm-hmm. This is going back probably 15, 20 years. So it can be done.
Yeah.
So they've increased their fiber basket by getting involved in that tree farming program. And there's no reason that any other forest company couldn't do the same.
Yeah.
Say, for example, you're talking about your sawmill. If you're Miller Western and your sawmill is in Whitecourt, mm-hmm. There's no reason that you can't talk to all the landowners in and around Whitecourt and Mayerthorpe and, that area where there's substantial land holdings, commercial, like private landholders mm-hmm. holdings, and say to those folks, hey, we want to convert 10% of this municipality into tree farms, mm-hmm. and we're going to pay you to do it.
Yeah.
Basically pay you to grow crop, a tree farm crop. And so we can plan that within 15 years, we're going to expand our pulp mill by 20% because suddenly we have the fiber to feed it.
Yeah, which would be huge in a province like Alberta where our number one exported resource is kind of the toilet, and we could use some extra help in those rural towns, right?
Well, unfortunately, and you bring up a good point, forestry in general is disrespected, and that's my opinion.
Yeah.
It's disrespected everywhere mm-hmm. in Canada. It's seen as the second or third largest industry, but then it's kind of seen as this industry that's way off in space somewhere mm-hmm. because it's not happening in downtown Edmonton or downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
It's something that's happening in north of Thunder Bay,
Yeah.
And so out of sight, out of mind. But the forest industry is an incredibly valuable resource in Canada and could be an even bigger resource in Canada if our leadership and our politicians, became a little bit more engaged in helping and growing the industry.
Yeah.
One of the positive things that came about recently was the Liberal government announcing in their platform that they were launching a $2 billion tree planting program, or they promised to. Mm-hmm. And apparently they're carrying through on it, and they're trying to bring
that's supposed
forward.
To be afforestation, right? Not
afforestation,
not reforestation.
That's right.
Right. So adding to the forest land base. Yeah.
That's right. And so I'm totally supportive of that. But $2 billion, that's $2 billion over 10 years.
Right.
And a commitment of $3 billion to do that. But quite frankly, that's peanuts.
Yeah.
Compared to the available land base in Canada that could actually be engaged in tree farming. That's a nice start. And yes, I hope they do it.
Yeah.
And in fact, I know the Canadian Forest Service right now is, scratching their heads on how to accomplish what the government wants to accomplish.
Yeah.
But that's a drop in the bucket. I hope it works, and I hope it presents a great example to us. And I hope we look at that and say, wow, we could do way better. And yes, we can. So that's my hope is that we actually take advantage of those situations. It makes the Canadian government, Canadians generally, look really good on the international stage, because then we can go to whatever the next climate change conference is, and we can say, hey, this is our plan.
Yeah.
We're planting 2 billion trees over 10 years. We're starting.
Yeah.
We're serious about greenhouse gas
I would love
reductions.
to see us get into the carbon market and helping fund the climate change solution in that sense, right? And that could be a huge step in that direction as well, right? Well,
it helps every other industry too. We have some of our fellow Canadians have this pie in the sky idea that we're going to shut down the fossil fuel industry. It's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. That the idea being that if we stop building pipelines, we're going to stop the industry. No, they're just going to ship it to the coast by train.
Right.
And they're already doing it.
Yeah.
So,
pretty dangerous to do that too.
And it's terrible. It's the worst possible way to ship oil is by train mm-hmm. through pristine British Columbia.
Yeah.
What are they thinking?
Love that word, pristine.
I mean, pipelines by far are the safest method of transporting oil that's going to get to the coast anyway.
Yeah.
It's not like you're going to shut the taps. But my point being that if we can develop a carbon sink tree farming type industry, that will help mitigate a lot of what is being developed by our fossil fuel industry. And so we can justify to a certain extent of development within the fossil fuel industry, which brings a lot of value to the country, in terms of jobs and income. And we can justify it by saying that we're balancing it with carbon sequestration so that we're not a pariah. We're not, bad folk in terms of polluting the environment. We hear about this dirty oil. Well, we've got to do something about that.
Mm-hmm.
And
we take responsibility for the actions we have taken and our response. You know what I mean? We have the capacity to do more to help the climate change situation.
I mean, there's a certain amount that the oil and gas companies can do, but they're in business to extract oil and gas. That's their business. And it releases greenhouse gases into the environment. That's a fact. That's not going to change. Mm-hmm. And if we continually put pressure on the oil and gas companies to do more for the environment, that's really not their lane. That's not what they do. Mm-hmm. They extract fossil fuels. Now, my way of thinking is we definitely have strong regulations. Mm-hmm. We definitely encourage them to do whatever they can to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, but we let them do what they do and create wealth and income for the country. Mm-hmm. And then we take measures like tree farming to help mitigate the impact of the CO2 gases, the GHGs that are being emitted to the environment through development of fossil fuel industry, so that we get as close as we can to net zero on the world stage. I mean, we've got to face reality too, that in terms of our actual impact on the environment in terms of GHGs on the planet is minuscule. I think it's 0.5%. The problem countries are China, India, and the United States. It doesn't matter what Canada does in terms of climate change mitigation. And sure, we can be heroes and we can do all we can do because we want to. But in the final analysis, unless China, India, and the United States do something, we're hooped because they're adding. China's building coal-fired plants. Mm-hmm. India's building coal-fired power plants. Mm-hmm. They're not stopping.
And we'll get down a rabbit hole there because it's like, and I agree with you to an extent that, like, yeah, those places need to be held responsible as well, but they're also a different level of human rights there, and there's a different level of they're still trying to build and stuff. But I think, although I agree with you, I also think that it's because Canada is Canada, and we have all these rights and freedoms, and we have this situation where we totally have the capacity to do more than our fair share, right? Like, just because we're only responsible for 0.5% doesn't mean we can't take up as much of it as much of the responsibility as we can, because we're Canada. We have this massive land base, and we have this potential. Like, I see it as like
But at what price?
I don't know. Yeah,
but at what price? Mm-hmm. So do we suffer economically because they won't do their job? They won't take responsibility? I don't agree with that.
I'm not saying we suffer economically. I'm saying I think there's innovative solutions to be had, and we can do more, and I think we have the ability to do more. Whereas countries like China and India, there's a lot of people living in squalor that are just trying to put food on the table relative to Canada, and I think that gives us a place of privilege in the world, right? And this is just my opinion. I'm not saying this is for sure what we should do. I'm just saying that I think we should take it upon ourselves in our place of privilege to recognize what we have and what we can do, and try and do everything we can. You know what I mean? Without, I don't know, causing our own economic turmoil and depression and people starving and stuff like that. So that's like the honor system. Mm-hmm. That if we just ask them to do this or that we're going to just trust that hopefully eventually they do it. And in the meantime, we'll carry more of the load
because, well, we don't know whether they can. And they describe themselves as developing countries. Sorry, I just don't agree with that. I think that you have to look at it strictly from a business standpoint. And what China and India need most are consumers. They need people to buy their products. I mean, we want cheap products, sure. And a lot of it comes from China and a lot of it comes from India because they're not paying their people very much to create these products for us. But we have the power of consumerism to dictate to a certain degree what they do. And this, I think this is what they fear the most, is the power of consumerism. If we're buying their products, to a certain extent, we can dictate how those products are manufactured. And if they're turning a blind eye to everything environmental in terms of their energy consumption, their lakes and rivers, in order to create those cheap products for us, then we're to blame. I mean,
that's a good point.
We as the consumer can dictate to them to a certain degree, I'm not going to buy that fridge, I'm not going to buy that TV, I'm not going to buy this whatever, unless you demonstrate a greater concern for the environment and lower your GHG emissions. End of story.
Totally. Yeah.
And you know, they'll do it because that's what they need more than anything. They need consumers for their products.
Yeah.
And if suddenly the consumers aren't there and the products aren't being bought because they're being viewed as a pariah on the world stage environmentally, they'll change. But until there's some pressure on them to change or to want to change economically in their pocketbook, in their wallet, they're not going to.
Interesting point. No, I don't. I agree with you there. I still don't think it like, I still think if we can be responsible for more of the load and we can handle that without suffering, that I think we should. But I agree with your point that like nothing's going to happen in this world. Unfortunately, we live in a world of money. Nothing's going to happen unless there's a financial incentive to do so.
Well, Canada's a bit of a Boy Scout too, and I was talking about the honor system. We trust people way too much. I'm sorry, we don't live. In my view, we don't live in that world. We live in Canada. We live in Disneyland here. You know, like everything is great here. We complain a lot, but we shouldn't. We're by far the greatest country to live in the world, and I've been to a lot of places. We have the second largest landmass in the world. If you want to go disappear and not see a person, go drive 100 miles north of Edmonton, and you can be in a bush and not see another person for another 2 weeks if you don't want to.
Yeah.
You can't do that in most of the rest of the world. I mean, the rest of the world is heavily populated. So we can't be too much of a Boy Scout. We can't, unfortunately, we have great values in this world. We can't assume that the rest of the world lives by our values. Unfortunately, the only way that we can talk to the big polluters in the rest of the world is money and economics.
You're right. No,
that's
it
the
is.
only thing they really understand, because we can't, and it's wrong of us to do this even. We can't force our values and morals on them. It's wrong. I mean, we have our culture, they have their culture. If they choose to do it that way, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But we don't have to buy their products.
Yeah. Well, that's a good. I like that thought process, because you're right. If you want to make a change, you hit them in their pocketbook, right? And that's it makes sense to me for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hopefully we can see some movement on that front, because you're right. It's a hard one to try. And I mean, like you said about, we can't force our values on them, but I think what we can do is come together as a human race and recognize that we've put ourselves in a situation where we got to start to take some corrective action soon, and it's not going to be it's going to be a global thing, right? It's not it's not a national thing. Not each country is not going to be responsible for just what they emit. They should be responsible for whatever they're capable of sequestering and trying to help out in whatever way, right? It's but obviously the big emitters, there's a lot going on there. We're getting down a rabbit hole. We're so far from forestry, it's ridiculous. But
not really. I mean, forests, and this again was I was talking about tree farming. They're the key.
Yeah.
You know, you can talk carbon sequestration all you want. You can spend all the billions you want in shooting carbon dioxide down a hole and hope that solves all your problems. And that's what we're doing. We're spending billions of dollars on this, when you could have just planted a big tree farm and accomplish the same thing.
It's amazing the stats on what trees suck up. Like, you just Google like how much oxygen a tree creates, how much it's actually insane. It blows my mind.
But we have to be concerned about biodiversity too. And I think
Absolutely.
I was talking to you about this earlier about, China is not a total pariah. I mean, they are planting trees, but unfortunately how they're doing it is destroying their biodiversity. They're laying waste to thousands of hectares of land, of biodiverse forests, and growing rubber trees.
Which is, it's
I don't think rubber trees are even an indigenous species to China.
No.
So they've destroyed their biodiversity to grow rubber trees. And they sequester carbon and they suck, GHGs out of the environment, but you've destroyed, a diverse environment to do it. So, you have to be concerned. As I say, you always have to have the biodiversity part of it in the mix in all your land management decisions.
Absolutely. We have to keep all of these thoughts in our head at once when we're making decisions on where to go and what the future is going to look like. Because if you just focus on one, you're gonna end up backtracking and having to change it all over again anyways, just to include all the values for sure. Right. So considering we talked a little bit about oil and stuff like that, even though it's neither one of our professional places, but I wanted to talk about, there was something I saw on your website there about the whole idea of planting solar farms on abandoned wells. Like in Alberta, we have, I think it's like 73,000 abandoned wells.
Yeah, this is just a no-brainer. I just don't understand why no one's talking about this.
So I want to describe like what actually is going on here. Is this actually feasible or just a pipe dream? It sounded to me when I first read it that I'm like, this sounds like it can't work. It sounds like there's too many moving parts. It's too far out in the boonies.
It's already being done in the rest of the world. Like, we are so far behind in the development of our renewable energy infrastructure. I'm talking about like solar farms, wind farms, biomass power generation. You name it, geothermal, all of them. Yeah. We are so far behind in this country in what is already going on in the rest of the world. And you gotta give credit to the United States. I'm talking pre-Trump here. I'm talking Obama before. You gotta give credit on how much they've invested into renewable energy production. The state of Iowa right now is capable of producing 100% of their power for all their residents in the state of Iowa from renewable energy.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
So I know Costa Rica, I think, is completely they're completely. I don't know if they're zeroed out or if they're actually producing more energy than they're using. I can't remember.
You can actually create power cheaper. And this is a startling fact. It's the fact. It's the truth. Mm-hmm. You can make power cheaper with solar and wind power now than you can from coal. Mm. That's a fact. And that's how Iowa did it, is they saw that they had a tremendous wind resource, so they responsibly set up all kinds of wind farms all over Iowa. A lot of them are the big stacks or the big towers are actually at crossroads of intersections of fields. Mm. So they're not taking agricultural land out of production, and they're 100%. But again, the reason that renewables is growing in the rest of the world is because it's cheaper. You can build a solar farm, and you can build a wind farm, and you can produce power cheaper than you can from coal.
How is it cheaper?
Right
I'd like to know how it's cheaper.
The reason is that the infrastructure cost of building a solar panel and the technology and the amount of power that actually can be generated per wind tower has advanced so far, and the cost of a solar panel has gone down so low, as well as the racking, as well as the inverter and all of that, that you can make power cheaper per kilowatt hour from solar and wind now.
Really?
The only thing that was holding it back, there's been it's dropped by at least 50%, right, if not more, within the last 10 years.
But less than coal, because coal I thought was like 10 times more.
No, coal is not only bad for the environment.
No kidding.
It's more expensive to actually generate power from coal.
So how can we still have this like whole, the common knowledge? Like my understanding even, and I kind of know a little bit about it, was that coal is still, I mean, this is not including the externalities of a carbon cost and stuff.
Well, part of the argument is, solar and wind, they're intermittent power. They're not base power, meaning that it's available 24 hours a day. It doesn't have to be just solar and wind. It can be biomass power as well, which is a 24-hour load factor. So if you build biomass in addition to wind and solar, you'll have 24-hour power production easily. Also, there's geothermal. Geothermal is another 24-hour base power resource. So there's ways of doing it, and other places in the world are doing it. We're just not doing it in Canada. And getting back to your issue of the oil sites.
Yeah, the abandoned wells, yeah.
The biggest issue with solar is footprint. It just takes a certain amount of land to install a solar farm.
Okay.
And one of the mistakes that's being made in developing solar farms, not so much wind farms, because wind farms, you can create the towers and the turbines sort of interspersed within the existing land base. But with solar farms, you need a certain area to establish that farm.
Yeah.
Too many of them are being established on greenfield locations. That means they're taking agricultural land or productive land out of production to put a solar farm there.
Right.
What really helps solar and makes solar tremendously valuable is when you can take a brownfield site. That means a site that's already been developed for an industrial purpose, and you convert it into a solar farm because it's already been cleared.
Yeah.
And so getting back to the oil field sites, many of these sites already have power running to them.
Right.
They're hooked
up to the grid already.
They're hooked up to the grid already.
Yeah.
So all you need to do is build a solar farm, build in your tie-ins electrically, and then tie into the transmission line.
So what's all, like, how complicated is that to do? Like, is it literally just like build a solar farm and plug it into the grid and it's done, or is
a lot of times the way it's done is a company, and there are so many solar power companies out there now. I can't even think of how many there are, but it's changed the economy in the United States because of developer of renewables. But what will typically happen is a company will come into an area. Pick an area, let's say the Hannah area, and they'll see that there are 150 abandoned oil sites in that Hannah area. So they say, we're going to establish solar farms. Well, and then they do a business plan, basically. They see how close all of those sites are to transmission lines, how much it would cost to install the transmission lines. And then they, of course, they want to pick the biggest site because it's the biggest footprint for the most power, from each individual solar farm. So they'll want to develop the biggest sites first, putting their solar farms there. Then they will wire it all in, and they themselves will control the flow. They will have a control center that will be monitoring all the power that's being generated and transmitted through the transmission line to TransAlta or whoever. So they are actually responsible for monitoring individual sites and the flow and the production of that power to an off-taker. Now, the off-taker can be the actual big power companies like TransAlta or EPCOR or whoever, or they can be individual companies and even individual houses. What they're doing in Minnesota, for example, is it's being done on what's called a net metering basis. So a company comes in, they develop a solar farm, and then they sign up a whole bunch of houses and landowners in the area to buy their power.
Oh, yeah.
And so the company sends the power through the existing transmission system. It's wheeled through the transmission or distribution system to wherever it's needed. But based upon the amount of power that company generates and their subscribers, in theory, it's called virtual net metering. In theory, that homeowner is buying power from that company.
Right, I see what you're saying, yeah.
It's not the actual power
right.
that solar farm is developing, but it's based upon the percentage of power that company is sending to the grid, and the subscribers to that company are actually paying whatever that company is. And this is where the savings are, because a lot of these companies, they can sell power cheaper than EPCOR can, than TransAlta can.
That was one of the issues that I heard originally, was that if say an individual was to have solar panels on their house, right, and they're providing the grid, say for example, with more energy than they're using, and they're supposed to get a kickback from the energy companies for providing the grid, but the kickback is like a fraction of what they pay. You know what I mean? So they're not getting equal. Like, they're providing the same energy, but they're not getting an equal payback from the energy company.
Yeah,
so is that part of the problem?
No, I'm not a big fan of micro generation. Okay. That's what that is.
Okay, sure.
Because a rooftop on a house just is not big enough to generate enough power to supply that house. It'll probably supply a percentage of it, but it won't supply what it needs.
What if every house had solar panels? What if we all had to do it?
Yeah, you can, but then you get into costs of putting solar panels in every house and wiring every house into a centralized production distribution system.
Right.
The way the system works best is when you have big solar farms or bigger solar farms on the megawatt scale. You know,
interesting.
Anything between 1.5 to 30 megawatts.
I would have thought it would be the opposite. I would have thought that if everybody had a solar panel on their roof, that solves the problem of a location and a footprint and all that kind of stuff. But it
all adds to the cost. It's always cheaper to build bigger in a single location and then sell it through a subscription basis, because the installation costs are cheaper for the company that's doing the development. Okay. They do it. There are companies that, for example, work exclusively with rooftops on schools. And then the money, or the school is the direct buyer of that power.
Right. So
the school can benefit or lower their energy costs by directly buying the power off that rooftop. Now, it works for schools because a school has a fairly big footprint, like the roof of a school. Yeah. And where it really works well are like car plants. You know, like places in Ontario where they have massive buildings that build SUVs or whatever.
A big space.
The roofs of these buildings, these manufacturing plants, are massive.
Right.
So they have gotten into rooftop solar. But it makes sense there because the footprint and the solar, the amount of solar that can be generated from that one footprint is considerable versus a single house. See, we haven't gotten to the point yet where we've been able to get more efficient from a solar panel.
Right.
There's just so much power a solar panel will develop. We haven't found materials. We're working with the best materials available in the world to generate as much power as we can per solar module. We have not found anything better yet. What they're doing now is what they call diffused light, that they're actually able to generate power from the sun's rays that bounce off the ground and onto the back of the solar panel.
Oh.
So they're not only generating power from the sun or the front of the solar panel, they actually have the capability now of generating power from the back of the solar panel as well. But you're only talking 5%, 6%. Right. You know, they're doing everything they can to be as efficient. But until we find some other, miracle material to build solar panels, we are going to get as efficient as we can. The game then becomes area and volume, because you know what each individual module is going to provide you in terms of solar production. So you just have to make sure you have the correct number of solar modules to generate however many megawatts of power you want to produce. And this is where you get into the footprint issue. If we could find some miracle material that could triple the amount of energy that a solar panel could generate, you could really reduce the footprint. We just haven't found it yet. You know.
But it's still this whole idea of putting them on the abandoned wells, that is a legitimately feasible.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
It's been researched. It's been looked into.
There's just no doubt.
So why isn't it being done? Why do you think?
Oh, you're going to get me into trouble here, aren't you?
We don't have to if you don't want to.
Because it's hard.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
It's too hard. You have to think.
Yeah.
You have to figure it out. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
And unfortunately, not all our politicians want to think about it.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same reason that they don't do just the same reason they disrespect forestry. Because there's no forest right outside their backyard. Mm-hmm. So they don't think about forestry and its importance because it's not where they live.
Yeah.
And it's the same issue with why they're not developing or using this opportunity of all these brownfield sites in Alberta, converting them to solar power, is because it makes their head hurt.
So would it be financially feasible, like as an investment for Alberta? Just say Alberta, keep it simple. Alberta, we said, okay, we're going to put solar sites on all of the applicable abandoned wells that still have power hookups and all this kind of stuff. How long would it take to pay that back, that initial investment, do you think? This is not including, like, this is using our current economic market.
I don't think Alberta should do it as a province.
Okay.
I don't think we should get involved economically. But how you handle it is with request for proposals.
Okay, so through private industry.
Yeah, you say that we want to do this. This is how much, we know how much we have.
Okay.
We know where they all are. We are interested in requests from proposals from anyone and everyone who is involved in the solar industry in the world to come talk to us.
Gotcha.
And do your homework. Figure out how many sites there are out there. Figure out how many of them you think are economically to develop, and give us a proposal.
Interesting. Okay.
And you do it.
Yeah.
See, Alberta should not own any of this. This should all be private industry. And they're very good at it.
Yeah,
this is, like I said, we're so far behind. We don't realize how many great solar power company developers there are out there.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are just across the border in the U.S.
Right.
That if we promoted Alberta as open for business and developing our abandoned oil field sites into solar power and did a bit of a splash in the U.S., we'd have out the wazoo proposals from solar developers across the border in the U.S., even a lot in Canada. Believe it or not, there's companies like Canadian Solar that are big solar panel developers. Most people don't even realize developed right here in Canada.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. So there's a huge renewable energy industry, people who know how to make money in renewable energy, that if you told them you've got this huge footprint, that your brownfield footprint, that you're looking to do something positive with, they'd be beating a path to your door like crazy.
Yeah, brownfield.
But you got to do it.
Yeah.
And you know, we almost did it. Here, I'm going to move on to a different subject.
Absolutely.
The problem we have in this province is we don't have a renewable energy department. Or renewable bioproducts department. Allison Redford almost did it.
Oh, really?
And I thought we finally were going to have it happen.
Yeah.
We've got too many of our renewable industries tied in with our non-renewable industries or our base industries. For example, forestry is mixed in with agriculture. There's no standalone forestry department.
No.
Why don't we have a renewable energy bioproducts department?
Because this is Alberta.
No, but that's my point, and you got me into trouble saying that. But that's my point.
Right.
Is that if we had a department in the government that's all they did, forestry, renewable energy, renewable bioproducts, you name it, that's all they did.
Yeah, why not?
We
would
be way ahead in terms of our diversification. That's all we need to diversify.
Absolutely.
They just won't do it.
Yeah.
Because the idea of renewables and competition with the fossil fuel industry is so anathema to so many people in this province, because they're just looking at their bottom line. They're just looking at their bank accounts. They're just looking at today. And they have so much power within our government that I'm sad to say that the opportunity is staring us in the face. We just won't do it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for sure.
Yeah.
No, that's rough. I see I think that as human beings, we'll figure this out, but I hope it's sooner rather than later, and I hope we don't keep hitting our head against the same wall, hoping to, wondering why we're not moving forward.
It'll be pressure. It'll be what it always is. It'll be money and pressure and customers, and we're seeing it already. This is why we're having such a terrible time building pipelines. Is because the world is already moving away from fossil fuels.
Public perception is very poor.
They're already moving away from it. And we've got new generations of children coming out of the school systems who are being educated in the value of renewables, in the need to reduce greenhouse gases, and in the issue of climate change in a world that they're going to be living in.
Absolutely.
Not us. They're going to be living in that world. So they're becoming voters. They're becoming consumers. And they're the power of the future. And they're the ones that are, to a great extent, not even in Canada, but in the United States and the developed Western world, who are driving policy now and saying, we don't want that much fossil fuel. We want something else.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Alberta is sitting on this huge deposit of oil that is becoming less acceptable to the global populace. And that's why it's becoming harder to build pipelines and harder to sell this. I mean, we've got a problem. We've got an image problem.
Yeah.
And if we as a people, including our government, just want to hold our breath until our head explodes because we just won't accept it. You just have to use our oil. They're just going to say no. We don't have to do anything.
It doesn't matter that it's the most quote unquote environmentally friendly, oil resource in the world. It's still oil.
The danger is that we keep investing into that industry. We just put our head in the sand and say, well, we'll just ignore all that. We'll just sell our oil anyway. One day we're going to wake up and realize that this province economically, and it's already getting there, is it going to be in huge economic trouble because we put all our eggs, or most of our eggs, into an industry that the rest of the world is backing away from.
Yeah, for sure.
And then what's it going to cost to be an Albertan then when nobody wants our oil?
Well, I'm concerned about the future of small towns in Alberta. Like I grew up in Slave Lake, a very small town north of Edmonton, and it's very dependent on oil, right? And the people there, they got into the industry because it was there. It was good money. Why wouldn't I, right? And now they've been forced into this situation because of a lack of diversification, and now they're hurting, and it's not their fault. It's the fault of the government not taking responsibility for investing in our province and knowing that what the future is going to be. Not that they should be future tellers, but you know what I mean. Like there's a responsibility there to add industry and diversification to those small towns so they can stay alive. And one opportunity is tree farms.
Well,
forestry,
exactly.
Right?
And I forgot to mention that, of course, is one of the benefits of tree farming is that you develop rural industry because you can't grow trees on Jasper Avenue. Like they're all going to be growing outside of Beaver Lodge. They're going to be growing outside of Hannah and outside of all these communities that, quite frankly, a lot of them are dying. And you create local employment and local industry.
Well, and the solar farm thing too.
No, but they could even develop their own biomass power plant in downtown Hannah.
Yeah, totally.
And provide district heating and district power to Hannah and area from power that they are generating.
Absolutely.
And you create jobs.
So many
local jobs.
Yeah.
You create income. You create employment. And it's sustainable. It's not like, the oil's gone, so now there's no job.
Yeah.
No. You're growing trees forever.
Yeah.
You're generating power forever.
Yeah.
So as long as you want a job working in that biomass power generating plant, you'll have one. Because there's more biomass coming.
Well, what about all these guys that are employed, going and checking on wells and on levels of wells, and they go out there every day and they're out there driving around? And there's a lot of people in small towns that are doing that. They could do that exact same job, but for solar panel on those same wells, right? Like, so those same jobs could exist. It sounds like if that thing is actually feasible and can actually work, like it seems like why?
But you have to have
it's such an obvious solution. It's weird.
No, there's two ways that you could do it. One is you can do it through direct investment, socialism, and become the actual builder and developer of the infrastructure, and you become, the seller of power, solar power, or you can bring in policies that encourage that development, and you minimize your involvement through policies. And generally, that's where it's not happening.
Yeah,
the government knows how to do it. Mm-hmm. They know what to do. Mm-hmm. It's just not where their voters are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a problem.
Their voters are, not particularly supportive of the renewable energy industry, and not particularly great supporters of climate change.
Yeah.
These are and unfortunately they exist in Alberta, high percentage of climate change deniers.
Yeah.
So this is the way politics are worked these days, is you get elected by feeding red meat to your voters. It's happening in the United States. Fortunately, it's happening here in Alberta. The idea of governance for all has kind of been put aside, and unfortunately, we're in a world right now where it's governance to our supporters. And the rest of the people who aren't your supporters, well, you do a little bit for them.
Yeah, it sucks.
But you focus on your supporters.
Yeah.
And if we unfortunately have a government that's focused very much on living, quite frankly, in the 80s, then we just have to just go along with it because they have the power.
Yeah. We can try and change public perception and just try and speak sense, I guess, but it's hard. But I hope that we can innovate and we can find a new way to do this, and we can move forward in a way that we can be proud of. That's not just because we believe in the people and they're hard workers, but because we believe that what we're doing is good for the world and good for humanity and that kind of stuff. So,
well, we have policy development these days, and unfortunately, the days of speaking truth have also kind of gone along the wayside too. We're in this world now that if I say something out loud, then it's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's not enough questioning of what our politicians are saying out loud.
It's true, yeah.
And unfortunately, there's not enough, in my opinion, desire amongst politicians in general to do the right thing for the right reasons for everybody's benefit, regardless of whether or not it's popular and it's going to necessarily get elected with a big landslide.
Yeah.
And this is the problem of honesty and integrity within our political leadership, is they live with the reality that that exists today in the 24-hour news cycle, that if I just say something out loud, it's true.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Man, we've digressed a lot from forestry. Hey, well, we've talked. It's been a good conversation. We've got this is an hour and 30 minutes already here, so we better shut her down at some point, I guess. But it's.
Well, do you have any other forestry related questions? I can, like I say.
Well, it's not just forestry.
I can sit here and talk shop all day.
Oh, I believe you. I don't doubt it. It's more thinking that I think people run out of time.
No, just getting back to just to kind of combine the issue of renewables and forestry. Mm-hmm. The forest industry has done a heck of a job of building more of the biorefinery model within their traditional profit centers. Right now there's a huge pellet plant being built in High Level. Mm-hmm. $60 million being built on a pellet plant by Tolko in the High Level sawmill. I'll give you another example. There's a huge lignin recovery plant in a pulp mill in Hinton. In Whitecourt, they have a biogas recovery system in their anaerobic digestion of their pulp solids, where they're recapturing the biogas and generating power from that. I can't think of how many facilities there are in Alberta that are actually using their hog fuel and their sawdust and their shavings to generate green power that they themselves are using and are also selling on the grid. So the forest industry, and this is again why I say that the forest industry is being disrespected, because the forest industry has done remarkably well in not in just in growing trees to replace trees that they're harvesting, but also investing in bio solutions for the planet within their own manufacturing facilities. And this needs to be encouraged more. This needs to be recognized more, because the forest industry have been leaders. We're not the pariahs, and I hate to pick the oil and gas industry, but they're not the pariahs of that industry in the world. They're the solution.
Yeah, totally.
You know? And even agriculture, I mean, if you took a look at it from a tree farming perspective, they can be part of the solution.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know? So there's ways that we can improve things. And I just want to give a shout out to the forest industry in general, because they've been leaders.
Absolutely. I agree. The people I mean, I'm in the industry, right? I know a lot of people, and I can speak for them. I think that like they are in there for the right reasons, and they are trying to always challenging their own practices to make sure that what they're doing isn't just the way we did it, and that it's the right way to do it for right reasons. And I feel pretty comfortable saying that, at least for the regulated part of the profession, the industry, right? Like, which I'm pretty sure all of Alberta is.
We just need to do a better job somehow of educating. I mean, everybody in government. And I don't know how many people I've talked at the bureaucratic level in government whose job it is to interface with the forest industry or bioeconomy or whatever. They still don't know it. They don't understand it.
Well,
and yet that's their job.
Yeah.
So how can we expect our politicians to be better informed when the bureaucrats themselves hardly understand it? So we somehow as an industry need to better inform our bureaucracies at the municipal, at provincial and federal level, and our politicians at all those levels as to the value of the forest industry generally. I don't know how we do it. I have no solutions to that, but it has to be done because we really are the solution.
I agree. That's awesome. Well, thanks a lot for taking the time to come on here and talk about this. I feel like we could sit here for like a day and a half talking about stuff, but I think my listeners will get tired of hearing my voice. Yeah. Thanks a lot for listening. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to the thoughts I put out there for people to listen to. And I hope you liked it. I hope you tell some friends about it. That's the main way that this gets spread around. Tell a couple friends, feature it, share it on social media, all that stuff. I really appreciate it. This podcast is available on a bunch of platforms: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, stuff like that. Share it, rate and review, all that good stuff. Anything you can do, I would be much appreciated. So thanks a lot, guys, and take it easy. We'll see you next time.